Hello, welcome back. Or if you're new here, my name is John, and I have a reading wrap up today. So this is everything that I have read lately has been fiction. I did attempt to read some nonfiction. I DNF'd it. I'll talk about why in a moment. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of books that I am currently in the middle of. We're going to start off with Jon Land's Vortex. And this is a Cold War science fiction action thriller. It's really over the top while still being mostly believable. And I think this is from 1984. I really, really enjoyed it. And I liked almost everything about this book. It hit just the right spot. It follows a Vietnam veteran, he was a commando, and then he was basically a hitman for the government for I think 10 years, something like that, and he has recently retired. His name is Joshua Bain. He lives in New York City. The way that this book starts is that one of his friends is an air traffic controller, and he is guiding in I think a 737, and it disappears. And he thinks that the plane has crashed, and so he calls up the emergency services and all that, and for 40 minutes this plane is just gone. And then it reappears and it lands and all the passengers get off, and he is very confused about this because he's getting stonewalled everywhere he goes, but he knows that this plane disappeared. It disappeared out of sight, off the radar, everything. It was gone, and no one will believe him, and the people who were there start to feed him lies and to tell him what to say. So he goes to his friend Joshua Bain to try to figure out if he can get some help and find out what's going on. So Bain meets up with him. He doesn't necessarily believe him, but he knows that his friend with whom he served in Vietnam, that he's not the kind of guy who cracks up. He's not the kind of guy who makes things up. So he starts to do some digging, and he has a lot of contacts in the government and that sort of thing. And then his friend winds up dead. And so he knows something is going on now. And so he starts getting together with some of his other friends, including a man who trained him, who is the reason that he is the way he is. This wonderful character. He's a black combat veteran of the Korean War. He lives in Harlem. He runs a gym. His name was King Kong, and a really great character. When Bain was still a teenager, his father was killed by gangsters. He ran an ice cream shop, and he refused, or a candy shop, and he refused to pay extortion, for protection. And so eventually they just showed up and they shot him. And so Bain went on this quest to find the toughest man he could find, the toughest man in New York. And he found King Kong. And the king taught him everything that he knows, basically. He taught him how to use guns, how to fight, all that sort of stuff. And then he drove him to find these two gangsters, and that's basically where his career in violence started. And then he went to Vietnam and everything like that. And one of the passengers of this airplane is a 15-year-old boy. I think his name was Jake. And he knows that something really weird happened on this flight. And when he gets off, there's a man staring at him. And he realizes that he can read this man's thoughts. He also finds out that he can influence other people's behavior. So he can just think, and they will do what he asks of them. So he runs off into the city, and the man who was staring at him was a member of this, it's like a weapons research laboratory called Cobra. And that man reports to his boss, who is this lunatic colonel who runs this whole thing, who has this really insane idea. And his boss says, "Find him. I want him." Now, that wasn't explained particularly well in the book, why they should notice something different about him, why they should want to go and get him. But that sets off the whole thing. And Bain, while he is trying to find the passengers of this airplane to hear their story, he goes looking for this kid as well. And he finds him eventually, but he runs off. And this whole chase for this boy starts, where Bain is trying to find him, and these bad guys are trying to find him, led by this really serious hitman who It reminded me very much of the character Jobert from 3 Days of the Condor, the movie, and not the book. I think that the movie 3 Days of the Condor is better than the book, to be honest. And the characters had different names and everything. So he is setting off to find this boy, and he finds out that Bane is interested. Now, they called Bane the Winter Man, and he knows that he is a professional. And so what it comes down to is that they want to capture this boy and use his powers as a weapon, basically. And on top of all of that, Project Vortex, what made this airplane disappear, the Colonel's idea is he has infiltrated a nuclear missile bunker in the Midwest, and because Cobra has made all these devices for it, he has been able to wire his own stuff into it so that he can control them, or at least that he can take advantage of them when he needs to. And his plan is that for creating these vortexes, like were used in the Philadelphia experiment to make this destroyer disappear, which that is one of those huge urban legends, right? That in the 40s there was this big government project called the Philadelphia experiment where they made a destroyer disappear and then reappear. And he has perfected this technology using these scientists who were working on the Philadelphia experiment. His plan is to institute a nuclear missiles test where they will launch nuclear missiles with dummy weapons. Only he will replace them with real warheads and launch them, and when they are in the air, he's going to use the vortex to transport them to Soviet Russia. And so, because the Soviets have developed a beam weapon that can shoot them down in the air, they will just appear suddenly and blow up. But the scientists believe that if that happens that fast, it will destroy the entire universe, because the rents in the fabric of time, the dimensions, will not have time enough to close before these explosions take part, and so it will destroy everything. And so it turns into this chase to find this boy, but also to stop this lunatic colonel from destroying everything in existence. And I just thought it was great. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. Some of it was really hard to believe, and some of it wasn't explained particularly well, like why they are after this boy when there's really no catalyst for why they would be chasing him. Like, nothing specifically happens that would make them be interested in him. And also there's a scene where they need to get from the East Coast to San Diego with all these weapons and everything, but they're also being hunted by the government. The good guys are being hunted by the government. And we never find out how they make it from the East Coast to San Diego in that short amount of time. It didn't really make sense because it's not like they had their own airplane or anything like that. I just loved this. I picked this up completely on a whim because I liked the cover. I thought it sounded interesting, and this was just a win. I really enjoyed it. The next book I finished was Karl Edward Wagner's short story collection, Why Not You and I? And I really enjoyed this. Like, I read this whole thing in a day. I didn't plan to, but I just loved it. There are, let me see, I think something like 10 stories in this. There are 9 stories in this. And I liked some of them more than others, of course. There were some really interesting ones. The ones that caught my attention, one was called The Last Wolf, and it was about the very last writer. Like, everybody on Earth basically has stopped reading, and if they do read, they read magazines, but mostly everything is on tape, everything is on video, so he can't make a living anymore, and his agent comes to his house and says, I can't sell your book. And not only can I not sell your book, nobody wants your book. And I'm getting out of the business because there's no money in this. And you should try something else. Maybe you could write screenplays, soap operas, whatever. And the last writer refuses. And while he's sitting there thinking about being the last writer on Earth, all these characters from these books, the lost books that writers had thought up, characters that they had thought up but that never got published, come and they visit him and they start talking, and there are characters from Hemingway books that never got published or written. from Jack London and Ray Bradbury and all of that. It was really great, and I like the way that went, and his just complete refusal to give in to this system that said he was obsolete, and even to get the ghosts come to him and say, "Look, why don't you join us? There's room for you here." And he's like, "I don't want any of that. I'm a writer. I write." And there was one called More Sinned Against, which was a really gross story. It was about two wannabe actors. They move to California, they meet each other, and like the man in the couple is like this awful, terrible person who is, they're both pretty bad people, to be honest, but the man takes serious advantage of the woman, and they're both convinced that they're going to be big stars. And so they're not able to pay their rent and that sort of stuff. So she starts doing like dirty movies, and then she starts doing really, really dirty movies, and then she starts doing really, really, really dirty movies, and like just really gross things, to pay for their rent, to pay for this guy. He's going to parties, so he needs money to go to these parties and to get cocaine and to network with all these actors and all that, to drink every night and stuff like that. And he starts really taking advantage of her, and like he takes her to a black mass where they take advantage of her, and she does these nasty movies with this like a voodoo backing, and she meets some people there, and just she has this terrible life. She gets hooked on drugs, into prostitution. She gets arrested. But she always has this idea that this actor, she's going to be with this actor when he gets his big break. And of course, he just ditches her. He doesn't care about her at all. And I thought it was a really interesting way that she gets revenge on this guy in the end. She has to go to work for a factory, and that factory produces dolls for this television series where he has become the main star of this television series. And she uses what she learned from voodoo to get back at him. I really liked that. And it was a dirty story. It was a gross story. Like, it's not outright explained, like it's not explicit, but we are told what is going on, basically what she is doing, and it's really gross. Uh, and another one that I really liked was called Sign of the Salamander. And this is an homage to pulp fiction, like the pulps of the 1920s, and to Lovecraft and that sort of thing. It's not particularly a Lovecraftian story. I thought of it as being like a Robert E. Howard horror story written for a radio drama. But it's told like a short story. There's, details and everything like that. It's not just like it would be in a radio drama, like a screenplay. It is an actual short story where we follow this man he was formerly a World War I combat pilot, and now he is dazzlingly wealthy. He's very educated. He's gone all over the world and learned from all these different teachers and learned about all these different religions, and he is a supernatural investigator. And he is chasing this man who has become this like supervillain, basically, called Dread. And Dread has taken up in the mountains of North Carolina. And if I remember right, I think Karl Edward Wagner was from North Carolina. He writes in that region quite a bit. Of course, he is no longer with us, and it's a shame too, because I think that everybody who reads Karl Edward Wagner probably thinks about everything he could have contributed to horror and to writing in general had he lived longer. And this paranormal investigator goes up against Dread, who is conjuring like a fire salamander from hell, basically from this other dimension, and it's very over the top and very pulpy. And I could just tell that Karl Edward Wagner completely adored the pulps, Robert E. Howard, Lovecraft, that he loved radio dramas and that sort of thing, radio horror, and I just loved it. It was very, very well done. And it was done under another name, at least in this book. And the writer, the fake writer, is actually he's a character in another story in this book, except it's, supposedly real life about what he gets up to, and I didn't care for that story quite as much, but it was still interesting. Now, there were a couple of stories in this that I didn't really care for because they mainly rested on twist endings. Like one was about a doctor, and we follow this doctor at this state mental institution, and he talks about like eating bad burritos from the vending machine and bad coffee and having to walk all over this place that's really really big and his feet hurting. It was a really interesting story. It was a really interesting premise, but I felt like there was a really I didn't like the twist. I don't want to tell you what the twist was. It was really hackneyed, to be honest, and I didn't like it at all. It just didn't, it just kind of ruined the story for me because the entire story didn't seem to build up to the twist ending, and I didn't like that. And the last story was about a hippie who, even in the 80s, he's still wearing like bell bottoms. He's still got his blacklight posters on the walls and stuff like that. He's still got long hair and a beard, and he's still very much stuck in like 1968, 1967, right in the summer of love. And his girlfriend, his wife, has left him, and he starts to imagine like Jimi Hendrix comes to visit him, Jim Morrison comes to visit him, Janis Joplin comes to visit him, and there's also a twist ending to that, and I didn't like it either. I saw it coming from a mile away, and I was just thinking, please don't do that. Please don't do that. Have something more interesting than that. But they can't all be winners, right? And I was thinking as I was speaking, there's another story that I really liked in here that's also worth talking about called Old Loves. And so this is about another guy who is stuck in the 60s. Specifically, there was a TV show in the 60s. It was a spy show. It had a male lead and a female lead. And the female lead's name was Stacy Steele. And she was played by this actress who who only really acted in the series and then like did a few B movies, and then basically she disappeared. She won't do interviews. She won't do anything like that. She won't surface. And this guy is the like the he's the only employee of the Stacy Steele fan club, or the name of the show. I can't remember the name of the show. And he is still stuck in the 60s, very much so. And he's been writing this actress these letters for years, trying to get her to give him an interview. And finally, she gives him an interview. So he dresses just like the character, the male character from the show. He's got like the Beatles haircut and like the Nehru jacket, the beads. He has fitted leather bell bottoms and like Italian boots with the heels and a cane that the main character carried through this series. And he has this idea that he's going to get there and she's going to, look at him and think, oh, isn't that awesome? He's just like the character in the way that super nerds do. They don't really live in the real world. So he flies all the way to California from his home. And I think once again, he lives in North Carolina somewhere, or at least on the East Coast. And he gets there and he knocks on her door, and she opens the door, and it's Stacy Steele, just like she was almost 20 years ago. Looks exactly the same. She's wearing clothes from the show. She invites him in. Her house is filled with all these, it looks like the set of the show, right? And I'm not going to talk too much more about that. It also had a twist ending, but I liked it. It was done well. It was pulled off well. I really, really enjoyed that, the way that story went, because it doesn't go where you expect it to go. And I just thought that was really well done. So I really like this. And if you like horror, if you like short stories, read this. This was good. If you can find it. I was super surprised when I found this. And I was even more surprised that it was only $1. I think it was $1.79. I almost like leapt over to it to grab it off the shelf, because I just never see this. I never see Karl Edward Wagner's books. And now I will say that there are a couple of stories that have been anthologized over the years that are really popular. And I can't remember the name of one of them. It has to do with like vines growing in a big city. And the other is called Sticks. I don't like sticks. And so I didn't really expect to love this collection as much as I did because I really have been lukewarm about the couple of stories of Karl Edward Wagner's that I've been able to read, but this was just great. And I see now why people hold him in such high esteem because this was just, I really, really like this. I don't know if you would have the same reaction, but if you see it, pick it up. And so after that, I actually did read Rimrunners by C.J. Cherryh, and I liked and didn't like this. And I actually gave serious thought to DNFing this, to just putting it down, because uh, after a certain point, I really did lose interest, and I kept reading to see if it would get better, and it really didn't. So it is about a I think she says she's 37. Her name is Elizabeth Yeager. She's living on this nearly abandoned space station. This is in the wake of a really big, like, interstellar war, and I didn't really understand the war. I think this is, I looked, and this is apparently the third book in this. It's not exactly a series, it's part of the same universe, but the books are apparently not connected as far as characters go. And I didn't really understand what the big war was about, but Elizabeth Yeager, she goes by Bet. She is, she was on the basically on the bad side, like the bad guy's side, the losing side, like the space pirates basically. And they came and got her. They came and they stopped her. She lived on a mining ship when she was young, and she basically, they would come and take all the young people and turn them into soldiers. And she volunteered because she knew it would be easier that way, because they would just, that would just give her some points from the beginning, because they were going to take her whether she wanted to go or not. So she went on this big ship called Africa, and she became a space marine. And that's really interesting. I thought that was interesting. She got separated from her ship somehow, and she has made it to this space station, and she is waiting to get a basically to get another job on a spaceship, hoping that maybe Africa will show up and uh, take her back, right? Take over the merchant ship and take her back aboard. That's her hope, I think. It's not really spelled out exactly, but I think that's basically what she's going for. And she just can't find the right ship. But she has no money. And the way that this place is set up, like, you have to pay to live there. You have to pay for everything. They don't allow, like, loitering. You cannot be a transient on this station. And she's living in a bathroom on this abandoned level. And a guy comes in there and tries to sexually assault her. So she winds up killing him. And she can't live in the bathroom anymore. And she goes to a bar. She meets a guy. She feels really gross about it, but she has to have a place to stay. So she kind of seduces this guy. And he turns out to be a bad guy also. And she winds up killing him in his apartment. And she hides him in the bedroom of this apartment. And she lives out of the apartment for a while, but she knows they're going to be trying to find this guy eventually. And so this ship comes in, and it's a ship from, it's not exactly from the people, like the good guys, so to speak. It is a kind of like an independent ship that goes out. It's like a spy ship. And so they are, like, the law on this station is closing in. So she just goes up to the spy ship, even though she is, like, if they find out who she is in her background, they could just transport her and as a criminal, as and they would do some really horrible things to her because they have no mercy. But she signs up, she goes aboard the ship, and they take off. And that's really when this book started to go downhill for me, because uh, it gets into some really, like, I don't know, it just evolves into, like, relationships, and it felt very much like high school on steroids, and very much like prison politics. She goes aboard this ship, and of course she has to live with all these other uh, they're kind of like soldiers and sailors. It's that sort of thing. But she's just very bottom level. She's not an officer or anything like that, and neither are the people she lives with. And they live in completely separate compartments. They don't ever really see each other, like the people who work on the bridge. And they all live in one big open area, and, like, the showers are co-ed, the bathrooms are co-ed. Everything is shared. Everything is out in the open, and they are just like they're just doing everything. Like they drink and they like have sex out in the open, and it's just like a very free love kind of community. And there are people who don't like each other, who hate each other, and she pretty much falls in love with this guy that nobody else on this ship likes. And he was off a merchant ship. They took him off a merchant ship. He doesn't want to be there. Uh, and the way that these ships travel, they are faster than light, but you have to be sedated to travel. And apparently what happened was that this guy, he's always shirking his duty. He's kind of whiny. He won't get along. Uh, he will not just admit to his fate as being one of these guys on the ship. And so he's always whining, always complaining, and they don't like him. And he was shirking his duty, and a guy wound up dying because of him. So they, instead of sedating him, they let him go through this faster than light jump, kind of like the jaunt from Stephen King, right? So he has become paranoid and jittery, and he has reacted poorly to this. But she falls in love with him basically instantly. And I didn't think any of the relationships in this were written well. And she, Bet, like protects him, and she gets in fights over him, and the whole time, like, you don't understand why, because he doesn't even seem to really know that she's there or like her or anything like that. Didn't make any sense. And at the same time, she's hooking up with other dudes, even dudes she didn't like. And she is always like saying things at the worst time and like getting in fights with people. And the officers are starting to notice her. She's a problem. She's brand new. And she reminded me very much of somebody I used to know, who she would get a job, and within like 3 or 4 days she would know everybody there, and she would know all the drama that was going on, and she'd like stick herself right into the drama. And then she would wonder why like she couldn't keep a job, and like why people didn't like her at the job, and like that's kind of what Bet reminded me of, because she just starts sticking her finger in all these different pies, her fingers in all these different pies, and like getting into trouble with people she shouldn't get into trouble with, and getting into all this drama that she didn't have to get involved in. I found that really frustrating, and that's the entire middle part, like 180 pages of this book, maybe more, maybe 200 pages, and it was just, I didn't enjoy it at all. And I kept thinking like, well, this has got to get better. This has got to get better. And all the action in this book was towards the end. And I just didn't, I don't know, I just didn't like it. I kept reading it, hoping it would get better. And then there's like all the action, and then the book is over. And that was really disappointing. So Rimrunners was a disappointment to me. I thought it would be really good. I thought the world was really well made, like the ship and the way that the ship is laid out in their jobs. And it really did feel like people working with each other that don't like each other and that sort of thing. But the dialogue was a little weird at times. The main character's motivations were really strange, and I didn't understand them. There was much more that I disliked about this than I liked. Now the next book I tried to read, I DNF'd it. It is Theodore H. White's In Search of History. There is Theodore H. White there on the back. And I gave this a fair shake. I really did. I read 136 pages of this book, and I just realized that I wasn't interested, and I didn't want to keep reading, and I couldn't imagine reading another 400 pages. I even pushed myself, because I actually started to get bored with it at about page 80. And it wasn't the events of the book that bored me so much as just Theodore H. White. I just didn't find his story. This is a memoir, and he was a reporter in the 30s and 40s, well, in China, but he also came back to the United States, and he did like political reporting. He did he had a series called The Making of the President, I think in 64, 68, and 72, I think. I have them. I have all of them. And he also wrote a book that I read earlier this year called Breach of Faith, The Fall of Richard Nixon, which I liked, but it felt very tedious at times. And this also felt very tedious. And so Theodore White, he was born in 1915. He grew up in a a Jewish ghetto in Boston, and he sold newspapers. And that was all really interesting. I liked hearing about, Boston in 1915, about his job as a newspaper salesman, his family, his grandparents, his father, his mother. I really enjoyed that. And then he went to Harvard he called himself a meatball. He said there were 3 levels in Harvard, basically, like the rich kids who got to go because their parents could afford it, and like the middle class kids who got to go because they had really, really good grades and that sort of thing. And then there was like him. He was a local kid who got a scholarship to go to Harvard, basically. And he could not get a failing grade in anything or they would have kicked him out. And he wound up taking a course in Chinese. And the teacher was really awful, really, really awful, and wanted to prove that basically that college kids could not learn Chinese. So he made the class extremely difficult. That was really interesting. I thought that was all really interesting. Uh, Post graduation, he got some kind of grant which would allow him to travel for a year, basically, and he decided to go to China. And he went to one of the newspapers in Boston, and he said, "I'm going to travel the world. Would you like for me to write some articles for you?" And the guy said, "Send them. Maybe we'll maybe we'll print them, maybe we won't. If we print them, we'll pay you." And he said, "All right." Didn't matter to him because he already had this year paid for. And he took off and he went around the world. He made it to China. And this was during I'm not entirely sure about like the Chinese Revolution, what was going on. There was like a force led by Mao, a force led by Chiang Kai-shek, and then the Japanese had also invaded China. So he went to China during this war, and he wound up taking a job as basically writing propaganda for Chiang Kai-shek. This was all really interesting, okay? Everything he was doing was really interesting, but I didn't like the way that this book was written. I didn't like that. I wasn't interested in Theodore H. White's story. I was interested in Chiang Kai-shek's story. I was interested in General Stilwell's story, and Douglas MacArthur's story, and Chu En-lay's story. Whereas with Theodore H. White's story, after his youth, I really lost interest in hearing about his day-to-day activities and his weird. He would just like interject some sexual stuff he was getting up to at the time, and I just didn't care. I just plain didn't care. And I just couldn't imagine myself reading another 400 pages of this. And I hate that. I've had this for some time. I've always heard that this was a really good book. And I think that this covers some really interesting incidents, some really interesting people. And I think that Theodore H. White himself was a really interesting person. I just don't feel like he had written his story in a way that was interesting to me, right? I would have rather just read his articles about these figures and about these events. Whereas with himself in the story, I felt like I was having to push all that aside to get to the interesting bits, right? And I don't know. I'm not happy about DNFing it. I may try this again. I don't know. But I really did give it a fair shake, and I really just got to the point where I didn't want to continue. And we really shouldn't. Knowing when to DNF is a hard thing to do. It is a perennial topic that comes up here on BookTube. When should you DNF? And I think when you get to the point where you just don't care anymore, it's probably a good sign that you should just move on to something else. And so now I'll talk about the books that I'm currently reading. I went from In Search of History to Jack Currie's Lancaster Target. This is about his time as a pilot of a Lancaster bomber during the Second World War. I'm about halfway done. I plan to finish this today because it is relatively short. It's only 170 pages long, and it's not like the best book on this topic I've ever read, but I'm really enjoying it. And then I am still reading The Lord of the Rings. I have about 20 some odd days left still, and I am to the chapter. I have just made it to the chapter where Gandalf and Pippin have made it to Minas Tirith, and Pippin has volunteered his services to Denethor, the steward of Gondor. So I'm just having a great time with this. I'm noticing so much that I didn't read when I was just reading it fast and trying to get, not trying to get through it, but just reading it very quickly in the way that I would usually read it. And by reading it just a chapter a day, I'm seeing a lot of things, and I'm having a lot of thoughts. And today I was thinking, you know, Aragorn is the rightful heir to the throne of Gondor, but he has spent his whole life as a ranger, going all these different places to Rivendell and Lothlorien and just all over the place to the outskirts of the Shire and through the mountains and everything like that. And I'm just thinking about how, well, for one thing, I was thinking about how there's no way that the people of Gondor would have waited 1,000 years for the return of a king. That's just completely unrealistic and can only exist in a fantasy. But also, I'm thinking about Aragorn and how, yes, for him it would be great to retake the throne of Gondor because that is what his lineage is supposed to do. That is his responsibility as an heir to Isildur. But imagine being basically free all your life to roam, and then you have to just come and live in Gondor. And Aragorn, although he is older than a regular man by quite some time, because if I remember right, I think it was his mother an elf or something like that, so he has a longer lifespan than a regular person would. And just to have to, I don't know, I'm just thinking about him going from being this ranger to being a king. Very different set of responsibilities and a very different life. It's kind of weird how I'm thinking about that, but I'm just thinking about this man having to completely change everything about his life. And yes, he will have his queen, he will have Arwen, but I don't know. Would you really want to do that? Would you really want to become king and have to sit on the throne in Gondor for the rest of your life after a life like that? And maybe he would. Maybe he's ready to take it easy. I don't know. Who knows, right? But that is where I am at today, and those are my thoughts today. And I want to thank you very much for joining me. I'd love to hear your thoughts, as always, and I will see you next time.